we're going to get the corporate view from energy producers, energy generators, and distributors. And so I will invite them onto the stage. Now, I know Alice was unwell yesterday, so I hope she's feeling better today. You are feeling better, evidently. Excellent. Well, welcome then, Alice Wells, Executive Vice President of ExxonMobil Europe. Matheus Rigas, who's Chief Executive of Energian. Would you like to take a seat here, Alice? And then we can stay in order. Maria Sferuzza, who is Chief Executive of DESFA. Aristophanes Stefatos, Chief Executive of Herema. And George Alexopoulos, who is Deputy Chief Executive Officer at Hellenic Energy. It's good to have the minister deputizing for me and greeting everybody onto the stage. I quite like that arrangement. Maybe we could make that a permanent position. Excellent. Well, I hope you all heard the discussion we were having. Very brief, very truncated. Unfortunately, the same rules apply to this session. We don't have a lot of time, so we're going to move quite quickly. And I'm going to start with you, Alice. You're exploring, not you personally, your company are exploring properties in the basin, in the region, here in the Eastern Mediterranean. Tell us your reflections on the role of the Eastern Mediterranean as an energy hub and your role within that.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. Domestic oil and gas, its resilience and its energy security. And it's times like these when we have geopolitical crises that we feel this need most of all. Energy is required for European homes, for businesses, for industrial facilities. They need large and continuous amounts of natural gas. And if you look at Europe, currently about 58% of Europe's energy mix is oil and gas. And almost all of it is imported. 97% of crude oil, 88% of gas. And if you look ahead to 2050, the picture is not going to change that dramatically globally. Globally, over 50% of the energy mix will still be oil and gas. And even in Europe, the most forward-leaning continent when it comes to GHG reductions, is going to be importing about 166 BCM of gas, about 5.1 million barrels a day. So about half of what it's doing now. And so what that really underscores is that investment is critical. Investment in oil and gas cannot go away. And this area, Europe has considerable untapped potential. I spend plenty of time in meetings where European officials tell me there are no hydrocarbons. They're wrong. And sitting here where we are and looking at Southeastern Europe and looking at Eastern Med, we see the exciting potential. ExxonMobil is involved in this exciting potential along with our partners, Energia and Hellenic. We are moving ahead with exploration drilling in early next year. And ExxonMobil's footprint in the Eastern Med extends to Egypt and Cyprus, where we've also made the announcement of commerciality. So this is a region that can add to Europe's energy security, and we're excited. But I have to temper some of that excitement with the reality of the European regulatory environment, which is extremely challenging. And unfortunately, some people don't view indigenous production as the incredible resource and tool that it is. Instead, they view it as something that needs to be punished or eliminated. And if I could point to a couple of examples, unstable fiscal or tax regimes, the Net Zero Industry Act legislation, which, for a good purpose, carbon capture, imposes a retroactive tax on oil and gas companies, telling them that they have to provide a service for which there is no market currently. They have to do it in a time period which is not possible, thereby opening themselves up to extensive penalties. I could also look at the EU methane regulation. Again, an example of a regulation where there's no disagreement over the objective. We all want to eliminate methane and mitigate it to the extent possible. but the regulation is written in a way and according to a timeline that can't be met by industry. And so it leaves industry in the position of either having to operate illegally or to stop bringing oil and gas into Europe. Now, we've heard Commission talk about easing or waiving penalties. That's not going to provide us the legal certainty we need. And thankfully, at least 17 member states are already taking on board the concerns and looking for opportunities to try to fix the regulation. Because it's simply unfair to ask businesses to operate out of compliance. And frankly, it's unfair to ask European consumers to pay higher oil and gas prices simply because the implementation structure of a regulation is not in place. And so I guess, if I could make my plea to policymakers, particularly in Brussels, but also member states. And I have to say we have excellent collaboration with the governments of Greece and Cyprus, who have been putting maximum effort in this collaborative effort to bring new energy resources to the region. But my plea is recognize the strategic importance of domestic energy, remove the excessive regulatory barriers, establish the stable fiscal regimes. Don't pick winners when it comes to decarbonization. Let the market figure this out. Let industry drive lower carbon technology. And then finally, realize the potential of this region. Help us invest here. Don't punish the investors.
Okay, I suspect the Minister heard that. Matheus Rigas, Chief Executive of Energy, give us your reflections, please.
Well, we're talking about the East Med in general, and we heard a lot about policy and obstructions, issues. Let's take a look at what has happened and what is happening in the regions that we operate.
In the end.
Energean, and of course we know we're near the size of Exxon, has invested in this region $3 billion in the last 5 years. So the message is, those that want, invest. And we find ways to work with governments to bring oil and gas to the consumers and to the people that need the gas. Second observation, and I'll come to Greece because I think that is a very important topic. When we took over the only production in Greece back in 2006, and we were talking about oil and gas in Greece, people thought that we were crazy and nothing would happen, and why are you wasting your time? As we heard before, there's no oil and gas in Greece. That's what I was told from people around the country. And fast forward to 2026, together with Exxon and Hellenic, and with the huge support we have from the government, February 2027, we're drilling the first deep water exploration well in 40 years in Greece. The first well that is targeting a structure which is 1,000 square kilometers. Put it in perspective, start from where we are in Lagonissi, go all the way to Marathonas. Imagine the region of Attica. This is the structure we're going after. A structure that has 200 BCM potential. And I use the word potential because I don't want to raise expectations with a 16 to 18% chance of success. But it's worth exploring. Mm-hmm. And together with our partners, we will drill the well. You asked in the previous panel about pace. Let me talk to you about pace. November, during PTEC, presence of Chris Wright, Doug Burgum, the ambassador of the United States in Greece, Exxon, Hellenic, we signed together the agreement. The government, in record time, approves the agreement. 2 months later, we sign a drilling contract. February 27, we have the first well. So this is pace. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'm a bit pushy with Exxon because they are much bigger than us, so they need somebody like us to push. So the key message here is you can invest, and there are issues, of course, and obstacles, but those that want get things done. Second message about what you said about, and it's absolutely correct, the obstacles and the destruction we have from the European Union. We're investing another $1 billion in Greece to create the first carbon capture and storage, the carbon storage project in the depleted Prinos field. A project that gives solutions to those that produce in Europe and need access to carbon storage. A project that decarbonizes the European industries, the Greek industries. A project that has the full support of the Greek government, the full support of the European Union. We're getting funding from the European Union. And now we're waiting for the emitters, the cement factories, the refiners, and all the other big industries to move in parallel with us. The platform is already in Greece. It will be installed. We're drilling wells next year. We're going to be ready. So the message to the industry is, I hope that you're going to move as fast as we do. So in the two key areas, and I'll come to Israel and I'll close here, 10 years ago, Israel was importing gas from Egypt. And it was relying on Egypt for the imports of gas. The government takes a decision. We want to make the country energy independent. Roll forward. Today, we are producing 40% of Israel's gas consumption from the deep water Karish field. Israel becomes energy independent. Israel exports to Egypt, and it becomes the biggest producer of gas in the region. So, industry, together with government, get things done. And that's my key message.
Excellent, thank you. Maria Sferuzza, Chief Executive at DESFA, your reflections.
So you move to the midstream. So first I start confirming what Matthias was saying, that industry and government together make things happen, which is the case in our case in particular with vertical corridor. But going to the region, I want to reinforce one message, because they do the hard work in doing exploration and production. Our duty is to bring the molecule wherever it is needed, right? And before it was needed in Greece mainly, and we were bringing from outside, and now it is needed in Greece and somewhere else, and Greece is taking over a bigger role than before, a bigger international role in the region than before. And gas, notwithstanding the tough regulation, the oil and gas market is really needed in the mix. The last 6 months of demand for Greece prove it, because we grew by 15%, and this 15% was mainly driven by export. So we have been flat, sustained in the Greek demand, and we tripled the demand of export. This means that gas is a critical factor in the mix, but is also a critical factor in the integration of the region, right? There are various ways to integrate the countries, but the gas is a critical element there. Now, if we move into the vertical corridor, because I think the tool, but in reality the strategic initiative that further prove that gas is a critical element and Greece is a critical player in this strategy. We had the annual auction on Monday, which was very successful. We were expecting to have a kind of 30% booking of the capacity. We ended up at over 45% for the next 4 years. And if I go back to the regulation, it's maybe Europe is the toughest continent to work with from a regulation standpoint, and it requires a lot of patience, right? But actually this auction comes after a long work with all the players in the region and the European Commission to develop a product which was complying with the tough regulation, because it's a tough regulation, but was competitive. And these are the results. So I think what is happening, the region show that working together we can succeed, we can create security on one side and competitiveness on the other side. At a point that for the vertical corridor, tomorrow we will mark a new milestone, because we will regroup all together here in Athens, and the minister will join us together with the Bulgarian minister to add 2 new members in the corridor, because I'm gonna throw now a new concept as an engineer. The vertical is not a corridor, it needs to become a circle. So we keep the initial VC, but we need to start to think more strategically. So it has been in the short term vital to talk about corridor because we wanted to support our partner in Ukraine, but the reality is, especially if we face the phase out of the Russian gas in 1 year time, there is a lot of demand that needs to be fulfilled in the region, which require more circularity. We have been very good, all the countries belonging to the corridor, in developing interconnecting point. So we increased our capability to export from about 5 BCM to 9 BCM, so we practically doubled, and many of the countries did the same. Now we are in the process to understand, going back to the point of diversified routes, which are the most competitive routes, but we know already that we need all the routes, because to fulfill about over 20 BCM of demand,
to ask you to stop there.
You need everything.
Okay, fantastic, thank you.
On time.
Let's move on to Aristophanes Stefatos, Chief Executive of HEREMA.
Yes, thank you for the invitation. It's hard for me not to express my pleasure of being here and also being in a position to celebrate the achievements of our country. And let me take us back for a moment, back to 2020, because that's when we took office. The government asked us, what are we doing here? You know, we have the energy transition. Europe was talking about a very fast transition. What should we do with the oil and gas? And at that point in time, we faced a very difficult time because half of the operators in Greece decided to do a strategic review and left the country. So in our infancy as a new oil and gas province, we faced a huge challenge. With the help of companies presented here, Mathios with Energean, of course, ExxonMobil stepping in and taking operatorship, and Hellenic, we managed to turn it around. And very recently, we celebrated the entrance of Chevron as well, doubling the exploration acreage. And as Matthew pointed out, a first exploration well being drilled after 40 years in Greece. And as a geologist, I cannot help but look at the geological trends. We are situated between Italy and Albania that have been producing for more than 40 years. And to the south, we have Libya, Egypt, and further to the east, Israel and Cyprus, all of them prolific basins. So for the first time, Greece will attempt to explore its offshore waters, its deep offshore waters. So we are very excited about that. And having contributed to this effort, with a strong political support, I can only be very optimistic that this is just the beginning of a very interesting journey into the future. And I have to say that Greece, I'm among those who strongly believe Greece can be transformed into the powerhouse of Europe. We have the renewable potential and the achievements that the country has demonstrated over the years. There's even more that we can do. But now, if we answer the potential with the hydrocarbons, then we are offering a very realistic alternative to all those who need the transition fuels, to all those who will probably move at a slower pace during the transition and supply the local markets, whether they are further to the north or the African emerging economies to the south. So our geographical position with this, the effort, the partners, and the potential scale of the achievement are very, very promising. And I have to also say something which comes from, from my heart. I'm really happy and privileged to be working with these companies. Back in 2020, when the prices of the oil were actually negative, you were getting paid to take shipments because nobody could store it. No, you didn't have where to store it anymore. Energean came with an idea: how could we maintain the almost depleted Prinos complex alive? And they said, okay, let's turn it into a storage, a CO2 storage facility. We endorsed it immediately, and what we have managed to achieve since that day, we have, I think right now, Greece stands in the forefront of the European effort to prove that there is a possibility for a carbon management value chain to be developed and provide value to the industry. We have, since then, secured 1 billion of European funds, which will activate 3.5 billion of private investments, and we could, I hope we will prove it on a European scale that this is possible and this is effective.
Excellent, thank you. And absolutely spot on zero. That was a masterclass in time management. George Alexopoulos, Deputy Chief Executive at Hellenic, your point of view, please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be part of such a distinguished panel, and I'm very glad to see our partners here as we're gearing up for the first exploration well in over 40 years. Allow me an observation. We shouldn't have to have two major geopolitical crises, the invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing Gulf War, to realize the importance of security of supply and cost together with the energy transition. But we did. I suppose we have to learn from it and see how we move on. But that shows us how important the diversification of supply sources and routes is. And in this latest ongoing crisis, we have 20% of the global oil supply affected and 20% of the global LNG supply affected. And yet, we haven't seen the kind of price increases we would be talking about if we were asked hypothetically that this thing was going to happen, and we certainly haven't seen any major shortages. That shows the resourcefulness and the resilience of the industry. And it's impressive how immediately pipeline capacity was increased, new export routes, including by truck, believe it or not, were activated, how storage was used in far-flung places by producers who had the foresight to place it there. So we must say that we are coping very well with the ongoing crisis, and the industry is already making plans for more permanent solutions. I bet you there will be new pipelines crossing the Arabian Peninsula, and I bet you there will be hydrocarbons stored far away from the production sites and closer to where the customers need it. I heard Alice very carefully talking about the impediments of regulation and how these could present significant setbacks in the progress we're trying to make. I will talk a little bit about refining. In the last 15 years, about 30% of Europe's refining capacity closed. Mainly, not exclusively, but mainly because they increased regulatory and compliance cost. And that has a clear effect on resilience and ability to withstand crisis. I'm pleased to say that, we're there. We managed the crisis by switching quickly our supply sources. We had to become very creative. We had to pay more, but we were there for our customers. We were there to supply products which were in shortage, like diesel and jet fuel. But we need to take this into account, and it's also very important, since we are in Athens, we should recognize that Greece is a major refining hub in the Eastern Med and in the broader region. with 550,000 barrels per day refining capacity. It's not just us, it's Hellenic Energy, but it's also motor oil. We cover fully the needs of the Greek market, and we also provide 20 to 25% of the Greek exports. So I think this is an achievement worth celebrating.
Okay, wonderful, thank you, and thanks for those points. We don't have a lot of time, and I do want to finish off with the Minister. I want to give the Minister an opportunity to respond to an awful lot of things that you've heard. Before I do, I want to ask the sacrilegious question, and I want to ask Alice to respond. It's unfair, I know, but I want Alice to respond on behalf of the industry as a whole, not just you guys, but everybody in the world. And that is, you mentioned, Alice, that you expect oil and gas to be supplying 50% of global demand by 2050. Why is that number so high? Why isn't it zero?
Well, I think this is an expert audience, so you know that currently global energy demand, 80% approximately, is oil and gas. And so a transition from 80 to 56 is quite substantial. It's something to be proud of. And I think, what I worry about is that the framing of the question in Europe has been, how do we eliminate oil and gas, not how do we eliminate the carbon emissions associated with oil and gas. Because if you want to have heavy industry, if you want to have manufacturing, then you need to figure out routes for keeping your industry alive, those supply chains, and the very necessary employment as part of domestic economies. So I don't consider that to be a failure. And I think within Europe, again, as the most forward-leaning geography in reducing emissions, there still should be a recognition that you want to go for the most efficient way to reduce emissions. And sometimes that's going to be blue hydrogen. It's going to be let the market decide, let industry innovate, set a target, and let us figure out how to reach that target.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure you could have extended that answer by many, many, many hours, but I'm grateful to you for giving us the edited version. Minister, I asked the question because, one of the key issues is everybody agrees with everybody here. It seems that everybody's happy with what you're doing here in Greece and everybody's progressing and it's all good. But clearly there is an issue that people have with regulation. And it strikes me that regulation, you guys, you policymakers in government and in the big EU institutions are responsible for it, but you create regulation in response to your masters, who are the populations, the citizens of Europe, and many of the citizens of Europe would have asked the question that I asked you. So regulation, in a sense, is just a reflection of where public opinion is. Reflect on that for me, and at the same time, reflect on everything that you've heard.
A lot of reflection there is.
Yeah, you've got 7 minutes, so
to reflect.
No complaints.
Okay, first of all, we spoke in the previous panel about this new energy architecture, and Greece being one of the shaping powers. The inherent ingredient for this new energy architecture, the 3+1, the MGF, the vertical corridor, the hidden weapon is that it's driven by the private sector. Mm-hmm. When we went to Houston, we spoke with Chris Wright about the 3+1. This is not a G2G initiative. This is for reputable companies like ExxonMobil, for Energy and Hellenic, and many others, to have a framework, a discourse of cooperation East-Med, that they can progress. And therefore, I'm very happy, because each one of these representatives here, they're coming from companies that they're taking advantage, so to speak, of this discourse and platform of cooperation that the governments are trying to establish. This open-ended, with no exclusion, trade rules adherence, no extremism, no coercion, environment of gas and oil to produce. And for me, that's very important. And yes, regulation is something that can create an obstacle. It can create a safety net as well. If one wants to be very blunt, I think there's a more energy pragmatism now in Europe, maybe reflecting this. Clearly, Greece is one of these countries. The Prime Minister has written a seminal article in the Financial Times a few months ago where he clearly detailed the Greek position. We believe that somehow, we believe we should continue the decarbonization route, but we need to be technologically neutral. Alice is right. We need to be cost efficient. We need, the decarbonization cannot be ahead of competitiveness of the European industry, because that's what we did. Decarbonization cannot be indifferent to social cohesion, because guess what? It will happen if it does. It will stop having this massive public opinion support, because Europe wants to move to the decarbonization route. But I think we moved a bit too fast, or we gave the impression of moving too fast. Clearly, in terms of the industrialization of the industry, we disregarded, in a way, the interest of the industry. We thought that this is something, or the critical raw materials. Now, this was a lesson that we learned hard. But working to, I mean, Maria said it with, when we started working on the vertical corridor, we were working on an exception of an exception. It's like a regulation, and we're moving on to the end of the regulation. And we worked together, and DESFA did an amazing job, and the other TSOs, and they're meeting tomorrow. And I've been following each step of the way, each country coming and each TSO coming from its own interest, and then building an alliance, and then going to Europe with the governments. And we managed to have products that now had this success that she described. So regulation can be reflected. And yes, Greece was one of the 17 countries 2 weeks ago. I was there with my deputy, Nikos Tsafos, and we concurred with the other countries, saying that the methane regulation, as you said, we all agree what we want to do. The way we're doing it is not the most efficient way. But this is a discourse of Europe. But you know, we're very happy that we're having this discourse, because together with this discourse, we had the vertical corridor being commercially now viable. Together with this discourse, we're able to have the regulation to phase out the Russian gas, to identify the Turk Stream as a potential backdoor for this 14, 15 BCM to continue to enter the Southeast Europe, and in a way to cannibalize and circumvent the regulation for phasing out the Russian gas. So it's a constant struggle in order to have how the market and the public moves, but the direction continues to be for a decarbonized destination. For me, I'm very happy that we have the companies that are present here. The refineries, very important at the time of the crisis with the Strait of Hormuz, not that we're away of it, out of it. The fact that we had Hellenic and Motor Oil here in Greece allowed the Greek market to feel stable. Herema, they did an amazing job in fast-forwarding the hydrocarbon sector. Greece needs to take advantage to develop all of its resources. Wind, sun, hydrocarbons, critical raw materials. Why? In order to be able to produce affordable and secure energy for its citizens or its companies. So Herema has done an amazing job. DESFA has been a key role with the other TSOs, Energean and Exxon and other companies. They're putting in action what we're describing in the previous panel.
Yeah.
And for me, that's very important. We're working together. We don't agree in everything, but we agree on one thing, that we should move fast. There's no time to wait, and energy is a growing factor for the Greek economy and for the Southeast, and hopefully we'll have good news in the next 10 months.
Excellent. Well, move fast and no time to waste could be the guiding principle of this conference. So with that in mind, we're going to move fast to the end of this session and hand back, is it Joan or is Joan. Yeah, hand back to Joan for the upcoming session, which will look at the renewables issue a lot more closely. Thank you very much for your help and your patience in answering my impertinent questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.